During the next few weeks, we're going to be exploring gratitude. I want us to begin by thinking about some very personal questions. Do you see yourself as a thankful person? Do you ever feel like there's a test? Like, how did you react when our video didn't go quite right? Or how do you feel when the sound system isn't cooperating? Right? Do you ever, I feel like we're in a little test situation here. But are we able, by the grace of God, to give thanks to God in all circumstances? We might find that there's a little gap between where we'd like to be in our gratitude and where we are. So that's the purpose of exploring this topic, to grow in our spiritual practice of gratitude. But I also want to apply these questions to our life together as a congregation. Do we see ourselves, Salem Church, as a grateful congregation? Do you think other people would see us as grateful? And is there room for us to grow in how we express our gratitude to God? I want you to know that this sermon series is very personal for me. And that as I look back, when you approach big birthdays, you have the liberty to do a little self-reflection. But I would say that gratitude is one of the most important, if not the number one, important spiritual lesson that God has been working on me in the last few years. You see, I thought I was a very thankful person. And I came to a point in my life where God really showed me that I needed to become more faithful in living a life full of gratitude and expressing that gratitude in meaningful ways. And this lesson came into focus in my life at a time where, frankly, I was hurting. And I had to make some big changes in my life. And so the spiritual work of growing in gratitude was very important. And a lot of you know that I spent a number of years working at the Board of Child Care, and I learned and knew that I would be working with a lot of children and young people who had been through trauma and were hurting. And I also found out that many of the staff with whom I worked, many of them were young adults, had been through similar trauma themselves. And so it was so necessary for me to work through my own hurt and come to a place where gratitude flowed from my life. And one of the ways that I was able to do that was to learn about what I call reframing, to take something that was happening that might on the first look might not have been a positive, and try to see it from a perspective of gratitude. And it brought a lot of healing. So I wanted us to begin to think about this topic of gratitude. And I found a little clip from the movie Despicable Me 3. And I have some stories about Minions, but they're not for this morning. But we're going to see a scene where the little girl chooses to see her disappointment in a positive light. So I'm hoping we can see the film clip.
Vroom! I found a unicorn. La 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 la, la la la. My life is complete.
Honey, that's not actually a unicorn.
Huh? But he has one horn.
I'm sorry, sweetie, but he's just a goat. Life is just like that sometimes. Hoping for a unicorn, and we get a goat.
Well, you know what? Lucky is the best goat in the whole wide world. Look at that face. I just want to squeeze it.
Woo! I'll take this.
So as Gru says, sometimes you're hoping for a unicorn and you get a goat. But what's her response? She so wanted that unicorn and she thought she had gotten her lifelong dream. She says, Lucky is the best goat in the whole wide world. So she turns her disappointment by reframing it and being grateful for what she has. So I think this is an important technique for us in practicing gratitude. Now, I want to be very clear. It is not denying the negative. We know that bad things happen in our lives. What it does when you reframe, it puts the focus on the positive. So I had a lot of examples about how I did this while I was at Board of Child Care. And I was thinking about how quickly we on the staff would start to grumble and complain about that. You may be able to relate to that or not. But for example, our campus got very crowded and there were days where there was just not enough parking. So we would have to park several blocks away and walk. Now, when this would happen, my first instinct was to kind of whine, complain, especially it was raining. But then I would say, first of all, I'm so blessed. I was physically able to walk. I was blessed that I had a car that I could drive to work. I had a job I loved, by the way. All these positives, and you try to reframe that, and I would say, I really need the exercise anyway. And it helped me to reframe in my mind and to enjoy that moment. A few weeks ago, I returned to a physical therapist that I had seen previously for something else and began working with him, and they were reluctant to give me an appointment. And when I went to see him, I found out why. My physical therapist had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he wasn't taking on patients, but because he knew me and we had developed a bond, he agreed to see me. But it meant that I often had to wait a long time for him to get there to make his appointment with me. And one morning he was very frustrated and came in, he was very late. And he said, I'm so sorry I made you wait. And I said, you know, it's no problem at all. I did the exercises I was supposed to be doing anyway. And he looked at me and he said, you know, that's a really good way to look at it. And I was so truly grateful that I was able to do that. I knew it was a struggle for him to come and work with me, but it meant a lot to him to see me. And I was meant to be reconnected with him. And I knew I wouldn't have much time with him. And the last time I saw him, he said to me, I need you to pray. And I said, I will. He passed away and the week before last, and he worked with me up until about less than a month before he passed away. So sometimes God gives us the grace to put things into perspective. And that's part of what gratitude is about, isn't it? It's important to do that reframing. It's so easy for us to take our blessings for granted. Our Bible lesson for today gives us a lens through which we can view our lives, the whole entirety of our lives, both the joys and the sorrows. And it's summed up for me in verse 8. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And our key verse captures this verse in a shorthand way. As we think about this passage of scripture, we must put it into context. What is going on in the Apostle Paul's life when he is inspired to write these words for us? Paul's in prison. And not just in prison, he's on what we would call death row. He's already been sentenced to death, and he's just waiting for that time. And he has already endured all kinds of hardships and persecution. He is suffering for the sake of Jesus Christ and his faith. And yet, Paul says, rejoice. And to emphasize it, he says it again. Rejoice in every circumstance, not give thanks for every circumstance, but give thanks in every circumstance. Paul says that we are not to worry. What is that phrase? Famous last words, do not worry. But really, Paul understands the anxieties and worries that we have in life. And he counteracts this with growing in our trust in God. And if we place our trust in God more and more, God will give us peace, a peace that far outweighs all our comprehension. And when we have this peace from God, God will guard our hearts. I want us to think about this image for a minute. It's the same word that you would use in a military context, like a sentry watchman, the one who watches and keeps people safe. Think about that. God stands watch over our hearts. God will protect our hearts from whatever life throws at us. But we choose to whom we will entrust our hearts, and we choose in whom we will place our trust. And yes, we choose what we will focus on in every moment. We can choose gratitude and a deep joy in Jesus Christ will be ours. And you know, when you start this practice of gratitude, it grows and grows. If you start to make a list of the things you give thanks to God for, you know, I'll just challenge you, start with a number like 5. And I bet you won't be able to stop at 5. The more you look for gratitude and express it, the more it grows. Gratitude begets gratitude. And I know that for me, when I focus on gratitude and I learn to reframe the challenges in my life, this is what helps me get unstuck in my spiritual growth. And so these messages in this series are deeply rooted in my own experience. And it's not a one-time lesson, right? You keep learning it in deeper ways. But I've chosen the name for the series, Getting Unstuck. And I can tell you that I have experienced times when I have become stuck in my spiritual growth. And those times can last a short period or a long time, but something is holding me back, and I can feel it in my relationship with God. And I've named 6, we would call them impediments to gratitude. They're the enemies of gratitude. And you'll hear a different one each week. But what I want you to know is it's not a linear thing, like you can't check it off. Like I've done this, I've done that, I've done this. You might have to go back and relearn some things. But I want you to know that I am struggling right along with you all with all of these things. And so my series applies to me too. But again, one of the ways that I have been able to get unstuck in those times was going through this practice of gratitude. And so we have our, this is our gratitude tree. You can see it on the PowerPoint, and this, you can see it here in the sanctuary. And thanks to Sue for making our gratitude tree. And at the base is the practice of gratitude, the heart, and then up at the top, getting unstuck. And this week, it's really about getting unstuck from hurt. And if you will, it's an autumn theme. So what happens to the leaves in autumn? They change color and then they let go. So we're going to turn over a new leaf today. Get it? From hurt it's not an easy process. From hurt to love. So we need to work through our heart, our hurt, and let go of it so that we can find what God intends for us to learn in these times. And we can open ourselves to allow God to work in us and for us to grow through our challenges as well as our joys. We need to remember the beauty that this autumn season teaches us to let go. Now, I use a number of daily devotions, and some come to me by email. And the other day I looked, and it was, the title was A Grateful Life. I thought that's pretty good timing. So I'm going to share just a couple sentences from it. It's written by Henry Nouwen, one of my favorite authors, and who actually was one of my professors in theology school. He writes, "How can we live a truly grateful life? When we look back at all that has happened to us, we easily divide our lives into good things to be grateful for and bad things to forget. But with a past thus divided, we cannot move freely into the future. With many things to forget, we can only limp toward the future. True spiritual gratitude embraces all of our past, the good as well as the bad events, the joyful as well as the sorrowful moments. From the place where we stand, everything that took place brought us to this place, and we want to remember all of it as part of God's guidance. That does not mean that all that happened in the past was good, but it does mean that even the bad didn't happen outside of the loving presence of God. Once all of our past is remembered in gratitude, we are free to be sent into the world to proclaim good news to others. I feel like those words capture so much about what I'm feeling. The grief, the loss mixed with the joy, and being able to give thanks in all circumstances. To always remember that no matter what, I am blessed with God's loving presence and God's never failing care. And because of that, God fills me with love to be able to share. And I found this quote from one of the saints of the church where she writes, "My vocation, at last I have found it. My vocation is love." And as I struggled with my own career, if you will, my places of ministry, I realized that the overarching call of my life is love. That's what the word vocation means. It's from the Latin to call. All of us have a calling from God. And I would submit for your consideration that the calling of our congregation, the vocation of Salem Church, is love. To love God, to love one another, to love our neighbors as ourselves. This is our calling, our purpose, why we exist, why God has made us who we are as a congregation. So today, you have been gracious in celebrating Pastor Appreciation. And I like to say, I want to say how much I appreciate your appreciation. But it means a lot to me. And I think I can say I've never had a brunch for Pastor Appreciation, never one like Lauren put together with her helpers. More importantly, how you all express your appreciation for me as your pastor says a lot about who you are as a congregation. And it is a way of practicing gratitude. And I don't want that to be lost on this day. Together, we give thanks to God more than anything else for who God is and for who God, by grace, allows us to be. What a joy in all circumstances. And we share the joys and the sorrows of our church family, but in all things, we rejoice, we give thanks, we appreciate our God. Thanks be to God. Amen.